Hello, everyone, and tonight we are continuing with our exciting exploration of the multiple visions of Daniel. We are in the apocalyptic vision section of the book, and we are doing today we're going to see the transition to Hebrew. So we stayed in Aramaic for the last chapter, and now we're in Hebrew. Again, probably because these are written at, and we'll see that things don't exactly match. I do want to point out a couple of things that I didn't talk about. I want to remind you about from last class. So in the last chapter that we looked at, we saw the people of Israel kind of described as angels, referred to as like the holy ones, and it seemed to really be talking about the people of Israel, the Jews, as opposed to just angels. Here we're going to talk about more kind of it's going to be a little bit clearer in terms of who's an angel and who isn't. In the last chapter, we had to interpret the different animals, saying what kingdoms were they, and I took the standard academic approach, which says we're leading up to Antiochus Epiphanes here, and so the last beast is going to be the Seleucids, but of course with the Medes and the Persians being separated into two different kingdoms. But of course, in the traditionally, the last beast is whoever that interpreter sees as the main kind of beast of their era, usually what we call Edom, which is Rome, which is usually Christendom, right? For Ibn Ezra, no, it's the Muslim Empire, because that's what he's looking at. In this chapter, they can't do that because we have an explicit interpretation in this chapter of what kingdoms we're talking about. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to have a nice mesh and match between everyone saying we're talking about Antiochus now, right? So it's going to be a very clear. That's going to be clear. Where we're going to diverge is the period till the end, and we're going to talk about that a little bit as we get to it. So I wanted to just kind of give you guys a preview. I see a question. So yeah, go ahead.
I can answer this later, but sorry. When we think about dates, and I don't know, I was rereading
about
today.
What? I'm sorry, I don't think I missed. I heard.
Sorry.
When?
How much after Yechezkel is Daniel, or what?
Okay. That's a great question. All right, so there are two ways to answer that question. One is, how long are we supposed to think there is between Yechezkel and Daniel? And then there's the academic approach of how long is there between Yechezkel and Daniel in terms of writing. Now, so you have to, so this is the thing, okay? If you're like, okay, Daniel's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, right? Which in the book he does, right? So that doesn't give you a lot of space between Daniel and Yechezkel, right? So the problem is, how is Daniel talking throughout? Now, what's nice about this chapter in particular, we'll see at the end, is there's a real acknowledgement of Daniel is supposed to be speaking at a time where he has no idea who Antiochus is. In other words, he's getting a prophecy from a far future time that he doesn't really get. And we actually get that in this chapter. So I like your question because it's very much in place, that you're supposed to think of Daniel as someone who he knows the Persian kings, right? But he doesn't go further than that. Right now, however, if you talk to an academic and say how long a gap is there between Yechezkel and Daniel, depending on whether they believe Yechezkel is composed at the time of Yechezkel, right? So then you're talking about a much larger gap, because you're talking about, and this also is a good point. If we look at First Maccabees, and we say, how long is it between the Antiochus's decrees and the cleansing, the purification of the temple? It's about 3 years. In other words, it's not 3.5 years, it's 3 years. Last chapter, we had 3.5 years. This chapter is going to be even a little more than that. I believe, no, I think I'm trying to remember now how it comes out. It's a little less than 3.5 years, but it's not the 3 years that we read about in First Maccabees. It seems that it's very possible that whoever is composing this, okay, now you can say, well, it's Daniel, and okay, if we're saying this is composed during the Hellenistic period, then whoever's composing it is still in the middle of the struggle. They don't know it's going to end so soon, right? They're not writing after it's ended. They're like, it's gonna end. It's gonna end pretty soon, right? But they're even overestimating how long it's going to take. All right. Now, if we're saying this is composed during the Hellenistic period, there's quite a gap between this and Yechezkel. This chapter in particular draws a lot from imagery we have in Yechezkel, particularly prophesying in a vision in a different place than where you're located by a river, right? So that's a kind of a setup that we have from Yechezkel. It also draws from Zechariah in terms of the way that you need an angel to interpret the vision. I'm sorry, guys, that I'm talking all around the text without diving into the text. We're going to do that now. All right, so we are reading Daniel chapter 8. Remember last week was chapter 7, and now we're on chapter 8, Chet. Okay, and we have Bishnat Shalosh L'Malchut Belshazzar HaMelech. So here we're staying in the same order of things. If the last chapter was the first year of Belshazzar, now we are in the third year of Belshazzar. And he's like, and now I saw a vision, another one after the first one. Okay, so in other words, this chapter is being written with the knowledge of the previous chapter, right? Or at least this intro is being written to connect it to the previous chapter, right? And what does he see in the vision? And of course, everyone can look at Robin's background if they want to see what, of course, Daniel saw. Nice representation. He says, what does he see? Okay, and I saw in my vision, and it was when I saw it, that I was in the fortified city of Shushan, of Susa, which is in Elam, okay, in the province of Elam. Now, what does it say? The castle? No, it's a fortified city. It's meant to be a city. We see Bira used like Kiryah as a parallel to Kiryah when we talk about particularly Shushan. It's a fortified city. And here we have, because I know you guys like to see the maps. Here we have a map. This is Elam. This is Susa, Shushan. Okay. Now, if we are placing Daniel in Babylonia, right? Babylonia had in fact conquered this area. Okay, under Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar conquered this area. All right. Now, under the Achaemenids, under the Persians, right? Susa was in fact one of the palaces and administrative centers. All right. So it was, depending on the season, it's one of the places where the king would have his capital. And so on the one hand, if we're placing Daniel with Belshazzar, so there are two possibilities here. Is he actually supposed to be in Shushan? Or is he seeing a vision of himself in Shushan because Persia is so central to his vision? So he's being transported the same way Ezekiel is transported in his vision, right? From Babylonia to kind of to Israel, right? In his vision. So here it's very possible he's being transported in a vision, or you could say he, as someone under the king, could have traveled to that area, and again, this chapter, you could say whether or not you're talking about someone talking in the Persian period, this chapter is trying to be pretty realistic, right? In terms of keeping the order straight. It's keeping things realistic in terms of where the Daniel is living when Daniel is living. Okay, so what does he see? He's on the stream Al Uval Ulai. He was by the stream Ulai. Ulai is actually what it's called in the Akkadian as well. In classical literature, it's the Euleus. It was an artificial canal apparently near Shushan. Okay. Ve'esainai ve'erev hinei ayel echad omed lifnei ha'uval velo kranaim, and he sees a ram and it has horns. Va'kranaim gvohot v'achat gvoha min hashenit v'gvoha ola ba'achrona. Now we're going to find out later in the chapter this ram is this ram is the Persians and the Medes. Essentially, the horns are the Persians and the Medes. So it has two tall horns. One is taller than the other, right? And the taller one is the one that comes up later. So in other words, the shorter one is the Medes and the taller one is the Persians, because the Persians are more important and they come up later in this kind of false chronology that has Medes before the Persians, right? This is the idea of Darius the Mede, quote unquote, right? That comes before. Ra'iti et ayil minagach yama b'tzafona v'negva, and I saw the ram, right, kind of going with its horns west and north and south. Why west and north and south? Because it's possibly because the emphasis here is on Persia going west as opposed to east. That Persia is kind of conquering Babylonia, right? And that's the idea. However, I believe in the Qumran parallel, we have actually all the directions. Certainly in the Greek parallel, we have all the directions. So it's possible that one of the directions just dropped out. In that case, it's just meaning that they're just spreading all over. All the animals, remember we're in an animal analogy. All the animals could not stand before it. No one could be saved from his hand. So no big deal. And he did as he wished, as he willed, and he became great. Vani hayiti mevin, and I understood, I contemplated this. Okay. Vihine tzvir ha'izim bamin hama'arav al pnei chol haaretz. Now I think it's more the reason for this break is for it to say, okay, this is something that's going on for a while. Like I understood it. This is the state of things, that you have this ram with the horns, and then all of a sudden everything changes. And this goat comes from the west over the whole land. He's going so fast, he's not even touching the ground. But Safir Karen Chazut ben Enav. Okay, and he has a very showy horn between his eyes. And this goat runs at him with all his might, runs at this ram with all his might. And so this goat hits the ram and breaks its two horns. And the ram could not stand before it, and it was thrown to the ground and trampled. Trampled it. No one could save the ram from him. Okay, so clearly this goat is the Greeks. The horn is apparently supposed to be Alexander. We'll see later that it's the horn that's Alexander as opposed to the Greek, as opposed to the goat himself, because we'll see the kings are the horns. Okay. Now, why should the Persians be rams? I was reading Nicholsberg's commentary on Daniel, and he points out that that Tusar of Babylon, who wrote in the 1st century CE, has this kind of astrology where he connects this with zodiac. He connects different countries, different empires or whatever, with different astrological signs, and the ram is Persia. So maybe there's this kind of tradition that Persia is a ram. I mean, we see elsewhere that Israel are sheep, right? But here that's not so. Here it's the ram is Persia, and the Persians and the Medes. And here we have a goat, and he's just kind of just wipes them out. He just tramples them. Okay. And this goat, okay, gets much, much bigger. And as he grows more powerful, his big horn breaks. Okay, and then instead of that big horn, they have 4 horns in all the different directions. What are these 4 horns? These are the Diadochi. These are the generals, Alexander's generals that kind of inherited from him. Ptolemy, Philip Aridaeus, Antigonus, and Seleucus Nicanor. Okay, so those are your 4 generals, and that's who it's talking about. And again, it's going to make it even clearer later that this is what's going on. Umin ha'achat mehem yatzah keren achat mitzira, batigdal yeter el hanegev vel hamizrach vel hatzvi. Okay, and from one of them who had a younger horn, and it grew to the south and to the east and to the land of Israel. Okay, this is going to be Antiochus Epiphanes. So as opposed to our last account, right, we had kind of a description of the kings that Antiochus Epiphanes fought and conquered. Here we're just kind of skipping right away. We're just skipping right away to Antiochus, right, coming out of the Seleucids. And he grows, and he is tremendously hubristic, as we'll see. Vatigdal ad tzva hashamayim, he grew till the heavenly host. Vatapel arza min hatzava umin hakochavim batir mesem, and he grew, he felled those from that heavenly host and from the stars, and he trampled them. Now again, we see this kind of connection, right, between, now it's not clear here whether, like the previous chapter, we're supposed to kind of connect the angelic host with with trampling on the Jews, or whether here we could read it much more as an allegory, right? Just this pure allegory that he's so hubristic, he's like, I can just trample, I can bring down everyone. Okay, so if we look, there's a similar thing. If we look at, let's take just a quick look at Yeshayahu. I hope I have the right thing here. Right. So here, right, where he's talking, you king of Babylon, look. How you fell from the heaven, right? Oh, star of the dawn or whatever. You were cut to the ground. You who kind of were able to conquer nations. You said in your heart, I will go up to heaven. I will be above the stars of God, right? Above the stars of God, I will set my throne, right? So it absolutely seems here like this is a similar sort of situation where it's describing the hubris of a human king, okay? So here, let's go, and in fact, we use it uses some of the same words. In fact, it's very possible it's drawing from Yeshayahu, drawing from Isaiah in terms of the words and the vision, right, of it, of the allegory. Okay, so right, and now we're going to go Va'ad Sar HaTzava Higdil Umimenu Huram HaTamid V'Hushlach Mechon Mikdasho. Now we're getting to what did Antiochus do, right? He grew up till he got great until he was even to the prince of the host. What's the prince of the host? The prince of the host is, it's either, Ibn Ezra wants to say that it's the angel angel Michael, right? Because Ibn Ezra wants to really distance anything from God in this section of Daniel. It's very possible what's saying is that he dared to try and even attack God. How? Because he removed the tamid, the daily sacrifices, okay, and he cast down the God's temple, essentially, his God's place, God's temple, right? and this is not so clear, it's hard to understand what it means. The host, were placed on the tamid as a transgression. It's not clear what's going on here. Is it somehow hinting to the idea that idols were set up? If we look at First Maccabees, let me get the right chapter here, and I'll put it in front of you so you can see it. Just a moment. Here we are. Let me put this here. Okay, I'm reading here. Do I have it? Okay, you see it, right? Okay, so this is First Maccabees. This is a translation of the Greek of the Septuagint. Okay, so here it's talking about what Antiochus did, right? And the king sent documents carried by the hand of messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Yehudah for them to follow precepts far into the land and to withhold whole burnt offerings and sacrifice and libation from the holy precinct, and to prevent Shabbat and feasts, and to defile holy precinct and holy ones. Again, here we have the holy ones. Again, holy ones being used for Jews, for Israel, not as opposed to angels, right? That word that we talked about last chapter, where we saw that phrase being used, to build altars and sacred precincts and houses to idols, and to sacrifice swine and common animals, etc. And to leave their sons uncircumcised. They have all sorts of things that they're doing here. But what we're reading here in this chapter of Daniel is really all concentrated on the sacrifices. Okay, so in this chapter, as opposed to the last chapter, which talked about other things, this chapter, the main thing is the sacrifices and what's going on, what's happening in the temple. So it could be that somehow there was maybe some corruption of the text here, that it's talking about some kind of foreign sacrifice. Maybe it's talking about the idol worship, that's what's going on, that was given instead of the tamid, right? But it's very hard to understand here what's going on. V'tashlech emet arza. And truth was cast to the ground, and this was done and succeeded, right? This is crazy, right? This is what this young horn is doing, right, in this vision. And I heard a holy one, namely an angel, speaking. And this holy one said to someone who was speaking, Ad matai hechazon hatamid v'hapesha shomem tet v'kodesh v'tzava mirmas. Until when is this vision of the continual sacrifice and this devastating sin, giving the giving over of the holiness and the host to trampling? In other words, how long is this horrible thing going to continue? Okay. But Yomer Eli, and he said to me, Ad erev boker alpayim ushlosh meot v'nitzdak kodesh. Okay. Until evening and morning, 2,300. And then the whole sanctuary will be justified. Okay. All right. What is this? 2,300. 2,300. So 2,300. If we look at its Erev Boker, we have the Tamid. The Tamid is brought in the morning and the evening, right? So how many Tamids are we going to miss? 2,300. That's 2,300. That's 1,150 days, which is less than 3.5 years. Still more than the 3 years, which is probably how long it took. It's less than the 3.5 years from the previous chapter, possibly because time has passed, right? So it's less than 3,500. Now, from the point of view of the author, actually, not from the point of view of Daniel, though. So we have, again, this idea of it's going to be about 3-something years until this ends. Now, that's one way of reading it. Another way of reading it is, of course, saying, well, each of these, what's 2,300? It doesn't say 2,300 days, 2,300 years. So, of course, in tradition, this is 2,300 years. And then the question is, well, when do they start? When do those 2,300 years, when do they count from? And that's going to determine when they end, right? Because if we're already living in 1,600 or 1,700 or 1,500 or 1,800, right, of the Common Era, we are going to want to count back, and we're going to see when does this time start so that we can look forward to the Messianic age, right? To the end, right? Not the end of time, right? But to this age, okay? And now we're going to come to the actual interpretation, which you guys already got a hint of, but I'm going to pause for questions.
Miriam?
Yes.
Hi. You know that I love concentrating on the zoological aspects.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Mhm.
Okay. I love concentrating on the zoological aspects. So I'm going back to the allegory.
Yes.
And we're talking about a culture that really knows its sheep and goats, speaking to an audience that really knows its sheep and goats. You've had the mixed herding of sheep and goats for thousands and thousands of years till this day with the Bedouin.
Mhm.
And as far as I know, it's quite common for a ram to attack a ram and for a billy goat to attack a billy goat, but it is very rare for a billy goat to attack a ram. So I'm thinking that they're using this particular allegory to show how unusual this particular altercation was.
I mean, I think it's supposed to be unusual.
Yeah.
I think the point, I mean, I think if this is something that you see all the time, it's not a big deal. I think that that's the whole point. I mean, I did not know this because I did not grow up in any sort of farm-like atmosphere. So I would not have said this myself, right? So I wouldn't have said, but now that you're saying it,
I didn't grow up in a farm
sense,
either.
right? What?
I didn't grow up in a farm either, but I've done an awful lot of hiking.
No, but you know more than I do. I didn't mean to like say, oh, you grew up on a farm. Like,
Yeah.
I don't mean that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean that I don't know this stuff. So like, yeah. So, I think that it makes sense. What you would want to have in a vision like this, is something that's unusual. You want something that's going to make the person who's talking about say like, and then this thing happened. That is bizarre. And you're like, yeah, that is bizarre. Like if he's like, well, and then the two goats got in a fight. You're like, and is there a dragon? Is there that's when you want the talking horn, right? That's when you want the horn to actually talk. Is as if you just got a couple of goats that are getting in a fight, right? It kind of like I remember this is kind of a non-sequitur, but I remember I was watching what's the name of the guy who does the voiceover for the BBC animal stuff? He's great. What's his name? Richard Attenborough, right? Richard Attenborough?
No, David Attenborough. Richard is his brother.
Oh, okay, so David Attenborough. So I was watching this thing. It's David Attenborough, and he's talking about an ibex. Now, anyone from this part of the world knows ibexes. They know how they climb. And he's got this ibex, and he's kind of running away from some predator. And he's like, and there's a 10-foot drop. What's the ibex going to do? And I'm like, what do you mean? What is the ibex going to do? It's going to jump. You know, this is not. I was literally confused. I'm like, what is he? Why is this? Because I'm so used to ibexes. I was like, what? Why are you pretending that this is an unusual thing for ibex to do? And I understand it's for the drama, but if you know about ibexes, and then the ibex jumped down the cliff, you're like, well, yeah, it's an ibex, right? So you want to have something that's kind of unusual for the animal to do if you're going to have one of these apocalyptic visions, right? So yeah, so I think that works. I think that works as a vision, that you'd have something that wouldn't normally happen. Right. So Ido is asking, was this pasuk the basis for the calculations of the Geula, such as that of Garmi and Vilna? I think it was one of the bases. I think that there was more than one, and I think this is one of them. We'll see other calculations later in Daniel. There are calculations from Yirmiyahu. Like you have all sorts of different types of calculations that people use to try to figure out when is the redemption going to come. So this is one of them. Okay, any other questions before we continue? Okay, so I will continue. Here we are. Okay. All right. So, so Daniel wants to understand this vision. Okay. Because he didn't have us there saying, "Hey, that's Antiochus," so he doesn't know yet what the vision is, and he's saying, "Vayhi ani Daniel et hachason." So, and then when I Daniel saw this vision, vavakshavina, and can you all see my screen with the verses? Yeah. Okay. Good. When I saw this vision, vavakshavina vine omed lenegdi kimar egaver. I asked to understand it, and behold, someone was in front of me who looked like a man, right? Who's this going to be? Of course, it's going to be an angel, right? Someone who looks like a man, but is not a man. Ve'eshma kol adam ben ulai, and I heard the voice of a man at the banks of the Ulai, which is the river, right, where he's getting the vision. Vayikra vayomar, Gabriel, haven lahalaz et mar'eh. And he calls and he says, Gabriel, explain the vision to this guy. I like this guy. This guy wants to understand. Explain the vision to this guy. Okay. Now, what's cool is this is the first time we have a named angel in all of the Hebrew Bible. There are two named angels in the Hebrew Bible, and thanks to Daniel. Okay, that's Gabriel and Michael. We're going to have Michael later. Michael. We're going to have Michael later. Here we have Gabriel. And in general, angels in the Hebrew Bible, in the Bible, are not named, right? We don't care who they are, right? They're not important enough. They are not named characters. They're, what do we call them? Non-player characters, right? They're NPCs. We don't care who they are. They just are supposed to do things kind of to get the plot running. Now, in this period, particularly what the question of when named angels became a thing, one of the theories is during the Persian period. During the Persian period, because Persians are kind of into angels and the angelic host, and there came this growing interest in what's going on in heaven. And then you would have this idea of starting to name angels. Now, not everyone was into named angels. For example, if you read the Qumran, you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're not super into naming angels. They got Michael in the War Scroll. Michael is in the War Scroll. He's important because someone's got to kind of lead Israel, and there's someone who's got to be opposite Belial, because you can't have God opposite Belial, because that would be like blasphemous, right? So you have an angel who's high up. So you have Michael there, but in general, you don't have tons of named angels. But in First Enoch, in other books of the pseudepigrapha, you absolutely have tons of named angels. They're really into it. But in Tanakh, we have Gabriel and Michael, and we have them in this book. That's what we've got. Okay, and anyone who wants to see the Diadochi as horns of the goat, Robin's got a great background. So take a look. Okay, back to our text. Okay, so he says, Gabriel, explain the vision to this guy. So he came to where I stood, and when he came, I was terrified and I fell on my face. That's the appropriate response to any sort of divine revelation, is to be terrified and to fall on your face. Divine revelations are not supposed to be taken lightly, and they're supposed to be tremendously scary. Because really you should like die or something, right? You shouldn't be able to take in this revelation of the divine. Vayomer Elai haven ben adam kilet ketz hachazon. He says, look, man, you got to understand that this vision is for this final period of time. That's what the vision is for. Okay, because he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't understand the vision at all. Uvidabro imi nirdamti al panai arza. So when he spoke to me, I fell asleep on the ground. Vayigabi, why? Because at this point, remember how we talked about like Daniel is considered, it's not considered a book of prophecy, it's actually considered a book of the writings of the Tuvim, right? Note how this is described. It's got to be a dream. It's not, he doesn't get real prophecy. He's getting these dream visions. So now he's he's asleep, and he's going to kind of touch him and explain everything to him. Vayigabi v'yamideni al omdi, and he touched me and he stood me up, right? Vayomer hineni modiacha et asher yeh b'charit hazam ki lemoed ket. And he says, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the end time of anger. Usually anger is anger of God, right? Because this belongs to the time of the end. Here, now, ketz is used in different meanings in Daniel, actually. Here it means a period of time that comes at the end, all right? Ha'ayel asher ra'ita bal ha'kranayim mache madai ufaras. It's not going to leave us wondering like in the last chapter. It says that ram that you saw with the horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Okay. Vatzafir ha'seir melech Yavan. And that goat is the king of Greece. V'karen ha'gadola asher bein einav hu hamelech harishon. It's like not quite the goat. That big horn is the first king. Is Alexander, right? Oh, he's messed up. It's Alexander. Okay, so the first king is the horn, right? V'hanishberet v'tamod arba tachtea arba malchuyot migoya modna velo v'chocho. Right. So, and then it's broken, and in its place is 4. Those are 4 kingdoms that will stand up, but not through his strength. Okay, his rule is over, and they will arise. U'va'acharit malchutam kehatem haposhim ya'amod melech az panim umevin chidot. And then at the end of their kingdom, when the sins have run their course, all right, this is similar to in Breshit Tedvav Tedzayin in Genesis 15:16, where it talks about that you will be able to conquer once the Amorites have like finished their sinning. Like once the Amorites kind of have done have deserve to be kicked out, that's when you can take over. This seems a similar situation. Once that sin has kind of run its course, all right, we're going to have the final guy, right, which is this very nervy king who also understands riddles or strategies. It's he's going to refer to something that's probably he's referring to an ambush that First Maccabees talks about, but he's a very clever king. He's a tricky king. All right, not just strong, but some kocho below bechocho, and his power will be mighty, but not because of his strength, right? So it's already telling us just because this guy's winning, that doesn't mean it's because of his strength. Really, God's behind it. God's allowing it. All right. And wondrously, he's going to destroy, and he's going to prevail and do things. And he's going to destroy powerful ones and also the holy nation of Israel, the Jews. But al sichlo v'hitzliach mirma biado, and through his wit, through his smarts, right? Through he's through his cleverness, he's going to succeed, and with mirma biado, with craftiness in his hand, in his power. And he in his heart will grow. In other words, he's going to grow very proud, right? Whether or not he himself is, besides him actually succeeding, he's going to grow very proud in his heart. And peacefully, with total certainty and without a fear, he's going to destroy many. Okay. But he is going to stand up against the Prince of Princes, and then through nothing, he's going to be broken. Through no power, he will be broken. Okay. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which has been spoken, is truth. And that vision of evening and morning, it sounds like this is for the amount of time this is going to take. the vision of how many evenings and mornings this is going to take until it's over. That's true. Va'ata sdom hechazon ki liyamim rabim. But you don't say this vision because it's not going to come true for many days. All right. What does this explain? What does this explain? If this is true and this is a vision of Daniel, why has no one been talking about it before? Daniel is the Babylonian, the Persian period, okay? We're living now in the Antiochian decrees. No one's heard about these visions before. Where are these visions? Where were these visions floating around if you gave them to Daniel? And the answer is Daniel sealed them because no one's going to understand it at this time, right? There's a verse in Yechezkel where they say, you're just saying stuff that's only going to come true in a really long time, so it's not worth anything. And Yechezkel's like, no, it's going to come true very soon, right? And so on the one hand, there's this idea that saying a prophecy that's for many hundreds of years in the future or hundreds of years in the future is kind of useless, and it's also going to get people upset, right? They're not going to believe it. Right. And there's also this idea that Daniel doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't know what this is referring to. He's living under the Persians. He can't even imagine the Alexander and the Seleucids. That's not in Daniel's vocabulary. So all this stuff has to be sealed up till later when it becomes relevant. Right. So there's a real recognition here of when Daniel is supposed to be living and why haven't we heard this vision before? Right. So let's go back to our verses, and we'll just finish the chapter, and then I'll come back to your questions. Vani Daniel nihiyeti v'nechaleti yamim v'akum v'aseh et melechet hamelech v'shtomem al hamar'eh ve'en mevin. Right, and I, Daniel, I was sick from this thing. Like I was just like, and I got up and I did the work of the king, which is a little weird because he doesn't really serve Belshazzar in the previous, like he's not that important under Belshazzar in the previous chapter that mentions it. But you can say, well, he was under him, he was doing stuff. It's still okay. And I was just wondered at the vision, right, and didn't understand it. Right? Why? Because Daniel can't understand it because it's from a future time. It's from a future time. Daniel can't understand it. And he's sick with the vision also because he's seeing this whole period of really bad stuff happening. It's not that he saw a period of good stuff happening. What's interesting is that this chapter actually doesn't have any promise about what's going to happen except that Antiochus is going to break. There's no promise of, and then there's going to be this wondrous age of miracles and amazingness and all this stuff. It just says, wait, it's going to be like around 3 years, and then Antiochus is going to be broken. He's going to be broken by nothing, by something with no power, right? So what's great is how nicely, and you could absolutely understand that, especially to someone who's in the middle of the Maccabean revolt, this is, and frankly, I mean, this is a reason to really say, once you win, once the Maccabean revolt was successful, something that I still find unbelievably amazing personally, the fact that Maccabean revolt is successful, after that, after the temple is actually, after 3 years, is taken back and cleansed and purified, this is true. This is a prophecy that came true, right? And you're going to hold on to this, especially because, as we know now, right, the fighting actually went on for decades after that, after the purification of the temple. The fighting was not over with the purification of the temple. It kept going for a really long time. Even when they purified the temple, right, they were still fighting at the Chakra. There was fighting at the Chakra in Jerusalem while they were purifying the temple. There are people who were fighting the pro-Seleucid forces at the Chakra in Jerusalem and keeping them busy while others were cleansing the temple. Right? We didn't even have Jerusalem when we cleansed the temple completely. Okay, so there was a tremendous amount of belief that we are going to succeed that was required to continue fighting until the bitter end. Now, I want to take a pause now. I see some questions. Robin said to add to Joe's question, is this passage in Daniel the basis for the idea that there will be an end time? Is there any earlier reference to this? There are lots of prophetic references to the day of God. You've got Zechariah, you've got Yechezkel, you have a lot of different references to end times, right? Some more miraculous, some less miraculous. We can't just say that, oh, we don't have the idea of an end time until Daniel. You could even start saying some of them maybe perhaps where a single messianic figure is important, others where there is no single messianic figure, it's God, redeeming everyone. Like you've got a full range. And again, and you also have this idea of horrible things happening before the end. I mean, what Zechariah describes is absolutely horrendous, because he's really describing a city that is torn by war, where, he's like, yeah, the half of the women are going to be raped. Like, it's horrible, like really horrible. You're not supposed to be, it's not, oh, people are going to be miraculously saved, or everything's going to be wiped, everything's going to be okay because it's only for a given time. He really describes a horrible disaster, a horrible tragedy that afterwards everything may be okay. But of course you have two different visions of the end in Zechariah, which is also a different thing. And then, and that's why you have a lot of people talking about Deutero-Zechariah, right? The second Zechariah, because they want to separate those two visions out. But we absolutely don't owe a vision of the end time in general to Daniel. We do have this idea, and we can't even say, oh, we only get this computation of time from Daniel, because we had that in Yirmiyahu as well, right? Yes, Joel.
Speaking about Zechariah, I met this man. He was yeshivish, but he studied with a certain Hasidic group. I forget which one it was. And he was quoting Zechariah. Zechariah was like nuclear war, and he related it to.
Oh, yeah. That was my grandmother used to say that. My grandmother was like, isn't that like a nuclear war? She would read from the part where their eyeballs melt, right? Yes. So it worked. Apparently it worked with my father when he was a kid, but it didn't work with me, because I knew a little bit more about nuclear war, and your eyeballs don't melt. Everything just disappears. So I was like, no, it doesn't sound like nuclear war at all.
No, but he went into detail. I mean, it taught me a bit. It was scary, and it was very contemporary. This was about 8-9 years ago, and he was saying, God only knows. I didn't fully know what he was talking about. How he said that the rabbis had prayed to God a gezerah. There was a gezerah. This was going to happen right away then, but God had postponed it for a few months. Again, I don't make.
Till when? Wait.
It was about 8-9 years ago.
Postpone nuclear war by a few months from when to when? What?
About 8-9 years ago, he said it was being postponed, and we had to do shuva. And
well, luckily enough, I was alive 8 to 9 years ago, and I would remember if there had been a nuclear war.
Yeah.
We did shuva in time, right?
I didn't really. To be blunt about it, he was a dentist, and I was on the dentist chair, and he was telling me this, and I got sick because. Yeah, it was scary. And I didn't know what to say. I don't mean to make fun of him, but it was.
And there was nitrous oxide involved.
It's only a dentist can get away with doing that, because you are trapped. You can't do anything. You can't even say stop. All you can go is, it's horrible.
Yeah, but
that's great.
Well, I don't know about great, but yeah.
I can see the whole picture. Yeah. If you're gonna talk about that things, that a dentist, that is the career for you. You should be a dentist, and then you can talk all the time about this sort of thing. That is great. Sometimes I think I should have been a dentist, right? I could talk about this stuff. Like, hey, let me tell you about the Second Temple period, and they couldn't get away. They wouldn't be able to get away. It would be great. Yeah. I mean, the apocalyptic visions. It's interesting because this sort of, what's interesting is what you do start getting more of, and I would put in a little. We'll look at how Daniel handles it later, also. But the idea of, when we say apocalypse, right? A lot of times we're thinking about the actual end of the earth, like everything ends, right? Now that's not something you're going to see in prophecy. You do see it in Second Temple books, actually, a lot more, where this idea, there's even there's one section of Enoch, and remember, First Enoch is really a collection of books. It's not all one book. So there's one of them where in the vision of the future, the world really is destroyed. And all the righteous people kind of live in heaven, and the world's destroyed. And there's no more world, essentially. It's just the righteous people in heaven, and that's it. That's not something you're going to see in prophecy in the Hebrew Bible, because that this world is what there is. Like that, this is the main play here. So to destroy the whole world, then kind of what's the point? That's not going to help us at all. You can talk about resurrection and stuff like that. That becomes much more popular also in these books, where if we're talking about it, and we had a class on this, if I remember correctly, where I know I gave this class, I'm pretty sure I gave it to you guys, talking about how the dry bones of Yechezkel, while in the initial understanding, you could say it was talking specifically to the nation at the time, saying, you will come back to Israel, your bones are not dry, you will come back to life, but talking about it as a nation, it became very easy to interpret that as you're going to actually come back to life. And that's when things are going to be evened out. The wicked will get theirs, the righteous will get theirs. That becomes a very popular idea in the Second Temple period. That's something that you see in the Second Temple period text and apocalypses that you don't see in biblical Hebrew prophecy. But the idea of something cataclysmic happening, you absolutely do see in biblical prophecy, especially described as kind of these cataclysmic battles, because that's something that I think also everyone could kind of understand. Everyone could see that as a picture in their mind, what that would mean. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm trying to if you think that Daniel was written in the Hasmonean period, that means that with the return from Babylonia, people brought with them these stories that were not written down, and that they were known, and someone wrote it down in the Maccabee period. I mean, how does this play out if the stories all take place in Babylon and they're not written down?
So academically,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so academically it's like this. So academically, they will say chapters 1 through 6 are written earlier. They're possibly from the Persian period. They're court stories, right? And they're talking about the experience of what does it mean to be a Jew in a foreign court. And they're also drawing from a fine tradition of being an advisor in court, right? That's almost a genre, right? And so, and then those are collected, right? And you have this character Daniel. And then when you have these visions that are being written during the Maccabean revolt, essentially, right? Are saying this was all predicted. This was all predicted. You have this horrible king until this was all predicted, including his fall, right? And they would date that to the Seleucid period. Okay. Now we know that people kept books, so like it's not so hard to say, well, you have these court stories and they're being collected and they're being disseminated, and they're being told. I assume that there were a lot of stories that were being told about Daniel that we don't even have written down, or that were written down and didn't survive, right? And in fact, later we have later stories, and we're going to talk about that in this class. Once we finish with the book of Daniel, we are going to look at 2 stories of Daniel that are in the Septuagint and not in the Masoretic Bible, the Hebrew Bible, which are Bel and the Dragon and Susanna, right? And those are 2 stories where Daniel plays a central role. And why not? Because we know Daniel, we know certain things about Daniel that he kind of brings with him. You say Daniel, you know certain things about him, and then it makes sense for him to be the hero of these stories, right? Now, I imagine there were many stories told about Daniel. The same way there were stories told about Daniel, right? When we talk about, and I've said this before, when Yechezkel says, 3 people, if there were only 3 people, Eov, Noach, and Daniel, and we fix it to Daniel, because who the heck is Daniel, right? But Daniel doesn't fit there because the other people are not from Israel, right? Eov, and the idea is Eov, Noach, and Daniel were actually famous righteous Gentiles, right? That's why Yechezkel's bringing them, because he wants to say the whole world works this way, right? But Daniel, how do we even know? We know this because we found stories in Ugarit about Daniel, this righteous judge, right? Did Yechezkel know the stories from Ugarit? Almost certainly not. He knew other stories about Daniel. They were telling other stories about Daniel in Babylonia, right? They weren't speaking Ugarit in Babylonia. They were, right? So there were all these. So there were many stories being told about certain central characters, right? So again, that's I think the general idea is that you have some earlier stories that are more court stories and centered around kind of dealing with life, let's say in the Persian Empire, and then you have appended to it the visions of Daniel, which are relevant to us now in the Maccabean revolt, right? Yes.
Is Daniel historical at all, or are just people making up stories and they get accrued to this character someplace?
I don't like. So again, obviously, if you believe in the tradition, of course, Daniel is historical. There's no reason to say he isn't historical. Like, he could have been historical. Nehemiah is historical, right?
Mhm.
You have in fact Jews who become, like, again, I always point to Nehemiah because Nehemiah clearly, and I do. If you read the book, you believe in him as a historical figure. He seems to be the historical figure,
Mhm.
and here he is. He's someone who rises very high in the Persian court, very high, enough that the king will allow him to do something that the kings of Persia have traditionally not allowed anyone to do, which is build the city of Jerusalem.
Mhm.
So Nehemiah is like, how can I stand here when the city of where my forefathers are buried is in ruins? And he's like, okay, you can go back and build it. And every single king has said, no, you can't build it because you guys are rebellious and you can't build the city, right? You can build your temple, but the city, no. And Nehemiah gets permission. So to say so you could absolutely say maybe there could have been someone who rose very high in the courts.
Mhm.
And also, it would not be unusual for someone to be in these courts did have kind of prophets in them, right? They had people who would have visions and say oracles, right? So, or they would go to the people who would say oracles, right? So you don't have to say he wasn't a historical figure. There's very little way to know, because by definition, any story that's told about him, anyone can say it's made up or it's true, right? So that's kind of where we're at. But it's not unusual to have, and in fact, one of the theories of why the Jews specifically could have gotten a letter to say you are allowed to go back and build the temple, because the Cyrus cylinder is talking to Babylonians, right? Babylonia was a big deal. There was a good reason to have a special thing written for Babylonians. Look, Marduk was helping me. I'm on Marduk's side. I'm going to rebuild his temples, and let you guys worship and all this stuff. There's a reason you would write that for Babylonians. Why would you write a letter for the Jews? We're like nobody. We're nothing. We have this teeny little country that just happens to be in the middle of everything, right? One of the theories is that Jews had risen high enough in the court that we did want to make Jews happy, so they would write a letter like that. And of course, other people say that the letter's made up, but the ones who say no, we think that the letter that this actually was a letter. One of the theories is that there were enough Jews that held an important place in court that it actually made sense from a political point of view to make a thing of it. That yes, you can go back. Like even with a regular policy, that you have a specific letter saying, yes, go back and rebuild your temple, and so who knows? So again, if you believe, you believe, like, right? There's no reason to say Daniel didn't exist, really. Like, there's no reason to say he wouldn't have existed. So thank you everyone for joining me. I hope I hope you liked it. And next week we continue with more apocalypses.